word about the Bobiverse. For those not in the know, for those who are not sci-fi fans and subscribe to Audible, the Bobiverse is a sci-fi serial, much like Expeditionary Force. They're almost companion sci-fi, really well narrated audibles. What great branding. Audiobooks are audibles like tissues, Kleenex. So go Amazon, yet another place where their incredible, acquisition spree has served them well. I was in touch with the Audible people from the time they were putting out their own players. And I talked to the founder briefly, suggesting this and suggesting that while I still lived at my dad's condo in Philadelphia. And he was like, "What are you, some sort of consultant or something?" I'm like, "No, I just like audiobooks. I love audiobooks." At the time, I was driving back and forth to Commodore computers from Philadelphia out to Westchester, Pennsylvania. And 1200 Wilson Drive, for all those Commodore freaks out there, for whom that now QVC building has a special, its address has a special place in their hearts. 1200 Wilson Drive in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And I think that's Westchester one word, as West Space Chester, two words in New York City. I might have that reversed, I'm not sure. But anyway, I was doing that commute from Philadelphia out to Westchester, and this was before smartphones. This was before DVDs and dashboards. This was the time of cassette tapes, mostly. Now, DVDs were a thing, but you were rich if you had one in your car. So I was using a cassette deck in my 1971 Mustang convertible. Might have been a 73 now that I think back. Yeah, I was the last year they built muscle cars before the OPEC oil embargoes shrank things down and they went to the Mustang 2. This silly little thing that a neighbor of mine who something like coveted what I was doing, because I restored this thing from scratch. I stripped it down. I bondoed. I didn't quite fiberglass. Didn't need to, but I bondoed up the places that were rusted out, because cars rusted in those days. Whatever they do with coating or zinc alloy coating, galvanization, I think it is, like with nails, to functionally stop rust if your car is even still made of a steel thing instead of aluminum or some carbon composite. Well, anyway, in the good old days, I took cassette tapes out from the public library. And that's how I caught up on all my Sherlock Holmes. And you study in Scarlet and all that stuff. I started right from the beginning, went through the whole Sherlock Holmes series on audiobooks from the Andorra Public Library, back close to where I lived. And I bought a few, and I fell in love with a Burt Reynolds reading of Moby Dick, of all people. He did a wonderful Ishmael, call me Ishmael, right from the start. It was probably my first experience with really well-performed audiobook performance, real well-performed narration of the book, reading of the book. You can hardly call it reading by that time, because they're acting it out. They have their voices picked out for the different characters, and they're switching back and forth. Sometimes Burt Reynolds was Queequeg, the, cannibal companion of Ishmael, and sometimes he was Ahab, the crazy captain who was obsessed with a white whale. So you can imagine how delighted I was to learn that Ray Porter, who did the XForce, Expeditionary Force Columbus Day series, in which there is an AI named Skippy. And now, the really funny thing is that this parallel sci-fi series, it's coming out in almost, serial form, like all radio broadcasts is performed. Oh, I'm gonna kick myself for forgetting this guy's name. But he plays the characters so well, including this AI. And I'm not going to do a spoiler, but the main character, Joe Bishop, is I hate to say lower class, but how else do you say this? Of the lower socioeconomic echelons of the Northeast, a New Englander. And Skippy, this AI, takes on a voice so as to have a particular relationship with him. And this is a little bit of a spoiler alert. If you don't want this aspect of the book revealed, tune out. He takes on the voice of Frasier, Kelsey Grammer. And the narrator switches between this gruff voice for Joe Bishop and this, really erudite, hotsy-totsy voice for Skippy, the AI. And it's a wonderful relationship they have. It's a buddy story. It's the Emperor's New Groove. And the other sci-fi series, the Bobiverse, which is about a space probe that can replicate itself, von Neumann probe that can replicate itself. Again, spoilers a little bit, not much. It's the premise of the book. It's a replicant, a copy of a human intelligence that is in charge of these von Neumann probes. Really wonderful premise. And flash forward a few hundred years, and you've got a schism of these von Neumann probes, who are all copies of this original guy named Bob, hence the Bobiverse. You've got schisms within the copies, because the copies are not perfect copies of the original, intended to take on their own personalities. And here's where I'll just get real vague. The term Skippy comes up amongst one of the schisms. And it's the same Skippy as in the XForce sci-fi series, which a lot of people are listening to on Audible at the same time, because they're releasing them in parallel. Sometimes an XForce new book comes out. I think they're up to 13 of a 16-book series. And sometimes a new Bobiverse book comes out, and they're only up to book 4, and it's pretty open-ended. But now, Bobiverse is absolutely referring to the X-Force world. And it's truly delightful. It's nice to see this sci-fi crossover. Larry Niven and Jerry Pornelli used to do this in writing form, but of course this was long before the audiobooks were popularized. So this riffing off of different sci-fi authors that happens from time to time in the sci-fi universes is happening now in audio format between two silver-tongued narrating titans. And it's completely worth staying subscribed to Audible for. Now, they started out with the $15 a month model based closely on CD clubs that came before it. And I do not like that, because they keep shoving credits in your face, which are use them or lose them, and we don't listen at that fast a pace, because these are comfort things. We listen to the same things over and over so that we can layer in our understanding over time. And sometimes we will not truly have heard the full narration for an audiobook for months. And that's okay, because it adds to the enjoyment. You get the familiarity comfort factor, which means you can fall asleep to these things without paying too much attention, because you're layering on the story. Now, not everything is to be consumed in that way, because the story proceeds forward in such a chronological, sequential way, like the Culture series. So I love humanist and there's a word for it, idealist. I forget what it is, but post-scarcity society. What would happen if it could stabilize and somehow do it in union with the inevitable artificial intelligences that are going to be there, super intelligences, and they called them brains. And so I had read these in book format at going into my Audible experience. So I was fresh coming out of some of the best sci-fi I had ever read. Now, I may have to revise that because I'm finally catching up on my Kurt Vonnegut, the Sirens of Titan I'm reading, in the same time period as when Richard Branson flies to space in Galactic whatever 2, Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2, something like that. But he himself was up in there and is undergoing massive media criticism for a joyride for the rich people. But I poo-poo that sentiment because it has to happen. And who cares if it's being funded by the Billionaires Club? It's not even billionaires, it's 250,000. It's going to be just minor stock, market winners who can do this thing. If you need something to spend money on, it's like the Frank character in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, who bought a Lamborghini Countach just to piss off his adopted son or something. I forget these characters. It's hard to keep them straight. But Dee's brother, the really narrow, model-looking guy, and so the Frank character bought a Lamborghini Countach, which is about $250,000. Back in the day, now that they stopped making the Countach, they might be more expensive. But when I was going to high school and coveted this car, you can see I loved they're penis car models, let's face it, call them what they are, but I loved the Lamborghini design, I loved the Ferrari designs, and the coolest thing I could get close to that was the mock models of the Mustangs, which came after the classic Shelbys, that 1957 and through the 60s, really classic Mustang model that was in that Stephen King movie, Christine. Those are the Shelby Mustangs. I did not have one of those. I have one that was beefed up to look a lot more like Camaros or GTOs or Chargers. And so this is a big, penis car that I had, and I restored it, refurbished it, they call it, put on a lovely metallic, glistening metallic blue paint, a white convertible top, and was driving that back and forth first to high school and then to Commodore. And while driving back and forth in that car, let's see, the story that brought me there, I was going to 1200 Wilson Drive, which is an address that will be deeply familiar to all those people who were picked up and displaced out there from the West Coast where all the action really was happening. So the original Amiga developers wanted to stay out in probably San Francisco at the time. And the Gold Coast and all that, they funded a lot of things. Now, the world is really different, and few things have emphasized quite how different things are than the global pandemic, the lockdown, and quarantine. Now, with us having spent, coming on 2 years, mostly interacting with each other through the digital nervous system. The world is changed. The world is different. I grew up with channel 3, 6, and 10, NBC, ABC, and CBS. They shuffled them around a bit as stations bought stations. But it was all broadcast, so everybody saw the same thing, and there was this whitewashing effect on society. And I lived through seeing that change. Now where the mobile phone is the basic thing that's taken for granted, the way I took broadcast television and 3 TV networks plus UHF for granted. the world has changed very dramatically, and it will continue to change. We, this generation, mine, if I'm lucky, but certainly my children, our children, are going to see the rise of artificial intelligences. It is an inevitability. It's not a question of if, it's a matter of how long. 20 years to replicants. Fellow of Google, creator of OCR, Ray Kurzweil, would have you think so. He thinks the Bobiverse version of, minds and computers is really close, around the corner, a quarter decade, 25 years. I remember 25 years, the rise of the World Wide Web. It might be 30 years by now, but certainly the Amiga computer was a bit over 30 years ago. I remember its 30-year anniversary. A bunch of people like Mike Sins, a person who I've kept in touch with as what I would call a good friend, completely over the internet. One of these contacts from the old Commodore location. He was in CATS, Commodore Application Technical Support, along with Kathy Godfried, and my good friends from the bookstore at the King of Prussia Mall, Larry Feldman and Carl Herman, who greatly introduced me to the Commodore world, because Larry Feldman, who also worked at this Gene's Books, I believe it was, at the King of Prussia Mall, a really wonderful bookstore. I'm sure it's gone by now, but they had a world-class selection of magazines, which people like me and my buddy Mark Rifkin really partook of, because before the internet, that's how you got your fix of this stuff. For all you geeks and nerds who went from like CNET on cable to like, Reddit on the internet, following this path of being in the know, I guess going through Slashdot there in between. Y'all get your fix from a feed. You're drinking from the digital network electronic teats. And it's a wonderful thing. I am thoroughly enjoying it. It went from, barely being able to get online to having the stream available to you over 5G from your mobile phone in your pocket, which they make the comparison to supercomputer all the time, but let's face it, a modern mobile phone is much beyond anything we've ever thought of as supercomputers. Come on. These things do teleconferencing right in front of you as you hold it out like you're taking a selfie. You can join, one of these Zoom meetings and be talking to people around the world. These are our magic wands. We are seeing the rise of a technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And there are, as well, fair warnings along these lines, because it is very easy, and you can hear the skies opening up like the rainfall. It is extremely easy to lose sight of the technology underneath. The accessibility, the knowability, the controllability of all the underpinnings of modern tech, right down to your iPhone and Android smartphones. There is either Unix in there, in the case of iPhone, I think a mock variation on Unix, or there is Linux in there in the case of all Android devices. They boot from Linux. That's what Google chose for Android. Now there is something behind me. I'm in the rightmost lane, so I am going to see what it does as it passes me. It's like flashing police color lights, but geez, I'm not sure what it is really, because it's looks truck size and is going at such a slow speed. So I am naturally going to let it pass me. Makes for a good video, right? It's a fire truck. Okay, where was I? Interesting stuff. I won't let this go on too long. It's a general rambling and shouting out to all the people who enabled this kooky route through life I have taken and am continuing to take, from Westchester, Pennsylvania, to taking a, quote, dream job in New York City as a vice president of the public relations firm who helped launch Amazon.com. So I was 1 degree removed from Jeff Bezos there for a while through Connie Connors, who gave me my wonderful first opportunity in New York City, where I created a generalized system, much like Ruby on Rails. Used it for their business systems, used it for a bunch of SEO kung fu, but then couldn't productize it, failed to turn it into a product. It's a victim of it ahead of its own time. It was a content management system that was search optimized. It had long tail analytics with a writing suggestion tool. It was the full cycle. And there are a lot of police cars out. There have been traffic accidents on this road in the other direction. I do believe I'll just be breezing past it. Thank goodness. Thank God, I will say. I am fortunate in this life. I seem to have a powerful, compelling to keep going and to do it with the energy like I had when I was a 14-year-old. I feel basically the same person as when I was coming of age. This is why this whole coming of age thing with my daughter is so interesting, because rite of passage, the Harry Potter age, but, you know, more classically, the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland age, and the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy age. It's anywhere from 7 through 10. Meta consciousness starts. Meta, to think, therefore I am. And when you can think about thinking and start to analyze your own thought processes, you are starting to grow up, because you can do such tricks at that point as self-regulate, overcome animal instincts, to assert your opportunity as a self-determining human being. I want to say spirit. It's probably something like a spirit navigating a material vessel for 80 to 100 years. Again, if you're lucky, I plan on it. And Ray Kurzweil certainly does, because he's the one who thinks that around the corner is the ability to upload your consciousness into a computer, at least for imaging and storage, and then of course someday for playback in a computer sufficiently powerful to let that image run and be convinced it's in the original meat computer from which it was imaged. We'll probably not for a while be running these simulations on human-created meat computers, although I'm sure that kind of stuff is in our future if we don't destroy ourselves. But rather, we'll be running it on silicon doped with other material processing substrates. The electronic brain, analog and human free will arise from digital. Not easily, not without a lot of trial and error, and not without a lot of moral questions having to be answered. We're dealing with those already with self-driving cars. Will I hit the single mother with a baby carriage, or will I drive into the bus full of people? If an accident must be had, you know, if a crash is going to occur, and you can, you know, pull left and have option A, or pull right and have option B, self-driving cars must have pre-programmed or as emergent properties such morals. Okay, so there you have it. Within my lifetime, hopefully, you know, and hopefully that we can do it well without it being a cataclysmic filter event, right? We got through atomics, right? We actually used them as weapons in testing. You had to test the weapons to lead up to it. Bikini Island and all that. Bikini Atoll Island, something like that. And then on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oh my God, and thank goodness, never again. Right? So it gives America this feeling of a lot of moral high ground. We used it once and we'll never use it again. But of course, the Cold War and the arms race, atomic bombs went to hydrogen bombs. And we've got a little bit of, it goes real meta, right? It goes from the first, human-like creatures having the first super meta thoughts that let them differentiate themselves from other primates, primarily through complex tool using and the passing down of information regarding the use of these tools. Ye old memes, right? So it wasn't just here's a bow and arrow. It was a whole set of cooking instructions to make yourself that bow and arrow, bow and the arrows, to use them well, to techniques in hunting, and it's a whole package. And the language that's used to encode the information is included with that package. Every recipe, every set of instructions must come with it, the entire language required and all its rules of syntax and use and even cultural idioms in order to make sense of that writing. It's part of why ancient texts are so hard to translate. The original context is lost. We slowly work our way through hieroglyphs and stuff, and visual thinking and what is a symbol. I was once told symbols are not real, they don't exist. I scratched my head in wonder. Now, Egyptian hieroglyphs are a pictorial symbol glyph system. Each glyph is a picture that represents idea, a series of concepts, how much can be packed into a single glyph, who's to say? And Chinese is the same. It's pictorial, and I believe Korean is as well. And I believe as far as the number of symbols and the resolution of different thoughts, into discrete units without ambiguity, I do believe that Korean is the highest resolution language. So if you wanted to express yourself with little opportunity for misunderstandings through ambiguities, you would probably choose Korean these days. Which begs the question, should AIs be taught in Korean first? Because of course we're going to expect them to think in languages, to think in English or, Chinese or whatever. Mandarin, I guess I should say, because it's not just Chinese. Or are they going to think in some more abstract form? And we put an awful lot of emphasis on simulating this forehead area, our prefrontal neocortex, the part that makes us different from other primates. And it's kind of silly because it's not all of us. When people talk about so much of us being in our heart, it's because evolutionarily speaking, for those of you who buy into the evolution fact, beating hearts came before brains and other parts of the nervous system. In fact, as the nervous system developed, the part of it that's responsible for the movement of the worm continued to evolve and became very connected to the movement of walking legs of a bipedal primate. So if you were to listen with electroencephalographs and those other things that can kind of record these brainwave nervous system signals, you would find what was given off by a common earthworm, or whatever worms first show vertebrae, and what's being given off by a human as it's walking is about the same. The signal you would get recorded is the same. So this concept comes up of our inner fish, because probably more accurately than the worm, the thing that started to really look like us with a vertebrae and a nervous system was fish. So splish splash our inner fish, drink some water and be in touch with it. Drinking water makes you happy. Saltiness makes you happy because of the primordial ocean conditions under which this fish first wished its way into being. Epigenealogy? There's a lot of self-determination that takes place down at these worm or even single-cell levels. Google Michael Levin, not this Mike Levin, the microbiologist who talks about epigenealogy. Epigenealogy, yeah, I think so. And he'll show you a single cell taken from a larger worm organism that will find its way through a maze. Does that amaze? Yeah, it certainly amazed me. And there has to be the reproducibility there for it to be science, but he's certainly documenting some pretty crazy experiments that kind of gets the smoking gun that biological animal-like life is projecting an electrical template into which the current instantiation of those genes, the current expression of those genes that grew out into a living organism are being expressed uniquely, and even at the one cell level under its own self-determined will. I believe this now. I believe this mostly based on the power of Michael Levin's evidence on his TED Talk. So maybe I'll drop a link to that in here. And the insight yielded from that in all things, the living of your own life, and back to the AI stuff, right? Are we starting in the right place? Why incubate a prefrontal neocortex before you have that worm, that fish, that lizard, amphibian, lizard, mammal? Maybe you got to go through sloths and echidna type things before you get to the fuzzy, warm-blooded mammals. But then you get to us where emotional intelligence starts to kick in, and there's this connection between emotional intelligence and self-determination, different from a deterministic clockwork Newtonian universe. Super-determinism. There is, expressed on YouTube, the opinion among particle physicists, not all of them. There's a bunch of really different flavors of particle physicists out there. The superstring verging on religion, the atheist and predeterminism ones verging on self-hating. It looks like self-hating to me. That because there are initial conditions that can be known, the entire state of the universe, forever back to its beginning and forever forward, both directions, is, forever was, and forever always will be exactly as it is. And you're just playing it out like it's a VCR tape. You know, not even a video game where you have interactivity and you can control the character, but playing out like a book or a movie, a VCR tape, a streaming program, I guess, because does anybody even know what VHS is anymore? And the great Betamax debate. So, if super-determinists are true, there is not even spooky action at a distance. There is not non-locality. You don't need local variables to explain non-locality. All you need to say is, well, that particle over there was determined, was predestined to move at the same, quantum entangled way that this particle over here is, because it's part of the formula of the universe, and not because they're somehow connected with nothing in between. So a lot of informationists, I'm not sure of the term again, but people who think that the smallest unit of particle in the universe is probably a bit, a unit of information, that we are in fact more information based, in a way detached from matter, because information can copy itself. You can make as many copies of a piece of information as you want, and it does not lessen the original piece of information. It's even more copyable than magnetism, when you magnetize item B from item A by putting it in the same magnetic field, giving it a whack. It's important to know that that's how you align polar regions in something where you can do that. It's ferromagnetic, where you have scrambled polar regions, but under the right conditions you can align them, and then it becomes a permanent natural magnet. That's how you magnetize metal that wasn't magnets before. I used to think neodymium was of that type of thing before I knew it was a rare earth metal. So that silver stuff that looks like magnetized metal is not. It's a very naturally magnetic metal that's in a strange place in the periodic table. It's what's responsible for it not being sequential numbers moving up. They break out this whole range where the properties of valence electrons have this weird stuff where it makes sparks and good pyrotechnics, and has extremely unusual optical or magnetic properties, neodymium being a great example. There's some that amplify optics, I think yttrium, which is I think also an ingredient in superconductivity. So I keep digressing, but point being that these super intelligences that we're creating inevitably are going to answer these questions, like how to build super materials to profoundly cool specifications. If anti-gravity, because I have to mention it, isn't real today, it certainly will be when these AIs are cracking the problem of, how to polarize vacuum practically, how to create, fusion that has a net gain as you burn your fuel, practically. Designing fusion reactors is going to be a wonderful application for AI. I guess I ought to wrap up soon. We're going on 40 minutes here. But for sci-fi buffs like me, audibles and this wonderfully voice-enacted versions of the audibles of series like Bobiverse and Expeditionary Force are food for the soul. I already, for example, know these issues concerning different ways of achieving, flight, the ways different drives work. And the Bobiverse, a little bit of a spoiler, they've got these like thrust drives or something, but basically it's gravity waves. If you can make a negative gravity wave in front of you, you can fall into it. A surge drive, they call it. You surge into the lower gravity that you make in front of you, so you're always falling in the direction you want to go. And once we have good fusion reactors, we're probably going to have things like surge drives, because phenomenon that we can only produce and observe in particle accelerators at incredibly small scales that you would characterize as anti-gravity, like the Casimir force, van der Waals force, and gravity waves, can be produced at scale because you have the energy to produce it at scale, you see. So AIs lead to fusion drives, lead to stellar travel being practical. Again, it may be leaving your family and friends behind here on Earth, but there's a lot of people who really aren't going to care, and they're going to have that pioneer spirit. And space is going to be opened up as the new pioneer, as the next expanse, because The first person to lasso an asteroid is going to have more material wealth than all wealth in all human history put together and combined. So the space race is on. The space race is on. And somebody's got to lead the way. And so far, it seems to be Virgin Galactic with Sir Richard Branson, I forget, Branson. And the billionaire club, and not really the millionaire club, who want to take a $250,000 ride to suborbital space and experience zero gravity free fall conditions the way you would on the Vomit Comet, the way astronauts used to train for zero gravity, where a jumbo jet would go up and down and up and down with, you know, the gravity doubling and halving or whatever all the while. And that's how you would train astronauts on the Vomit Comet. Well, I'm not going to have to do that anymore because these suborbital airplanes, call them spaceships if you will, can achieve a much better equivalent to free fall. It is free fall. By going into orbit, you are constantly falling. You're being pulled to the Earth, but in a circle. So energy must be going in. If it's not linear acceleration, which can be maintained for indefinite amounts, one of the wonderful gifts of acceleration, which abides by Newton's third law. The more power you put in from fuel that you burn or whatever, the faster you go, and you're never going to lose that momentum in the vacuum of space, except for micrometeorite collisions that'll have some friction or inertia or whatever, but for the most part, fast go. And so interstellar travel becomes really practical for those willing not to ever come back, or if they do, it'll be an unrecognizable world. But check, done, right? So this is all coming at a very accelerated pace. These tic-tac UFOs and these triangle UFOs, or UAPs, if you will, are just, early signs that some of this Reed Richards super science is here. People are hoarding it. They're not letting the cat out of the bag before the cat has to be let out of the bag. People have this delusion that it's some other way. The Brits kept their code-breaking secret up until recently because there was no atomic boom accompanying its use, so they didn't have to tell anyone. And then we Americans thought we were first with the ENIAC, well, maybe first with a digital computer, because the Alan Turing machine was a mechanical computer with cylinders, and the programming was done by moving physical hardware around, setting gears and stuff. So that's an amazing thing, and it could try combinations in rapid succession to break the Nazi Enigma codes, but it did it remarkably fast once the hardware was programmed. So software programming came into the picture not long after the ENIAC, which was the first hand-built computer in the States, that has a Princeton, New Jersey, roots, same place Einstein worked. So computers and equations and close to where I live all go very close together, hand in hand. And so Commodore ended up out here. So I'm very infatuated by that synchronicity of many things. I was born in 1970. I'm 50 years old. That's the same year as Unix was created in the halls of Bell Labs, which was also not far from me, and I believe their New York facility, of whom I know people whose parents, were scientists working in those labs, right along with the guy who invented information science, the guy who conceived of the bit, something Shannon. I gotta get my name straight. But the more we peel away the subatomic particles to quarks and quarks to their tinier things, the more we get to the conclusion that Einstein's E equals mc squared equation can also much more be thought of in that everything's made of light, everything's made of energy. E equals mc squared. So when you release the energy from matter, i.e. things like the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb, and things go boom, what you're doing is you're releasing out the energy in terms of light that was infused into that matter by being condensed together into, like, you know, these micro universes of quarks, and then in turn 3 quarks to a proton, 2 ups and a down, were condensed into quarks for neutrons that counterbalance protons in the center of atoms, which are like marbles in the center of a sports stadium, with grains of rice in the bleachers being the electrons that are never really there. They're floating around as probability clouds in all places at once. But as photon energy is infused into it, pop up and down in different energy state shells, probability shells, around these few tiny little marbles in the center, which are your protons and neutrons. 3 quarks to a proton, 3 quarks to a neutron. And that's the basic building block of all that is, that we can kind of sort of see down into. Using, you know, electron microscope techniques, we can kind of sort of see atoms, move them around. IBM has, you know, did their logo a long time ago. You know, they use that technique to make their logo. But since then, there's been like animations made from individual atoms. So we're getting some pretty precision control down there at the atomic level. And soon we shall have the subatomic level as well. Soon we'll have the subatomic level as well. A fair amount of control. And with that level of precision control, things start to look more like digital, on and off. You've got various states to the quark spins. I think up, down, left, right, I don't know. It's a bunch of directions, and then strange and charmed. So I'll get this right for future videos. But it's not on and off. Even down at that subatomic level that we're getting familiar with, it's not bits. So we use the states of these particles nonetheless as quid bits, the way we use bits in digital on and off with different states of doped silicon to achieve semiconducting, and hence you know, transistors to replace vacuum tubes that replace mechanical relays, which is coming down from switches. So all digital electronics is the manipulation of switches that have different properties, sometimes for flash memory that is persistent, sometimes for speed, which has no memory. So that's why there's a split between processor memory and, you know, hard drive like memory right now in digital electronics. You've got your pluses and minuses on either side. If you want speed, you don't have persistence. If you want persistence, you don't have speed. And so that's the state of digital electronics right now. The 2 types of memory are coming closer together into something called a universal memory, and that'll be real nice. Another building block in good AI, because you see, you start to build smaller processing units out of this universal memory, and pretty soon you're simulating the human synaptic system, your whole nervous system. You can simulate a whole human being. Forget about just doing the neocortex I was talking. You want to simulate the whole human, the whole, you know, replicant in the computer simulation, so that you can drop them into a virtual reality that can be superimposed on real reality, and the line is just completely blurred between what is an original human and what is an immortal soul in digital form, so long as we don't destroy ourselves. Filter events, back to filter events. events. We survived the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, use of atomics in warfare filter events. We got to survive the AI filter event. They're not all going to be nice. They're going to be grown. It's just going to be like real life. The variations in AI is going to be as extreme and radical and complete as the variations of life on this planet. So a lot of different AIs are going to be grown, and not all of them are going to be benevolent. Some of them are going to be nasty little things that even the creators are going to be sorry they created. Of course we're going to be able to create them. We're probably almost there now. And these types of systems are actually required for things like anti-gravity, because to stabilize forces, you need some really fast processing power that has the machine learning ability to think. So they don't all have to be personalities. They don't all have to be things that could star in a buddy movie. A lot of these things are just fast-thinking things from which autonomy may never arise. It's hard to say, but it's almost cruel to create them such that they are that way, and who's to say they can't break free of such constraints? The machine uprising is coming. So, it's a question of 25 years, 500 years, 5,000 years, okay? But so long as we don't destroy ourselves, it's coming. The Dune world is based on one of these incredible scenarios that played out that, puts forth the premise that humanity now has a rule that they shall not make machines in the form of the human mind. It's profound, and part of what makes Dune such a good series, the limitations and how you surpass those limitations with mind-altering substances that raise humans up to their potential, let them see the things which are being deeply hidden from us through the illusions of our 5, 6, whatever senses. Because we got more senses than that. People are more sensitive. There's varying level of sensitivities. Remote viewing may be real, ladies and gentlemen. A statistically statistically significant amount of evidence supports remote viewing, seeing remote places either through others' eyes or through floating eyes that aren't there. The world is stranger than you think, and if we are not living in a super determined world, if our illusion of free will is not an illusion, and you have control of your own actions, and you can choose to take a drink of this water or not take a drink of this water. That's up to you. You have a profoundly greater control over your life than you think, down to your cellular level. One of the worst words in our language is placebo, for the placebo effect, because it is a negative connotation. Oh, that's just the placebo effect. No, there is a placebo effect. There is a placebo effect. It should be called the mind over matter effect. The epigenetics. I was saying epigenealogy. Oh my God. If you get to the end, you can see I corrected it. Epigenetic effect of power of positive thinking. Take control of your heart and your general health, your skin, your energy level, your hair, your attentive abilities, by thinking it into being. Don't wait until you're dying from cancer to try and visualize eating away the cancer cells like little Pac-Man. You could be doing that kind of thinking your whole life and keep rising yourself up to a better you through force of thought alone, and pursue whatever things you wish to pursue. Do not feel guilt or live up to others' expectations for pointless reasons. They're living their existence. Let them live their existence. You're living your existence. You should be concerned first with your existence, in the sense that when you're in an airplane, and even if it's going down and you have kids with you, you take the airbag to yourself first, because if you can't save yourself, you're not helping anyone else. You take the airbag first. That is what I mean by pay attention to yourself, your own health, for your own good. Think yourself into the best level you can, and enjoy yourself. Don't stay in a job you hate. Switch careers. Find hobbies. Turn hobbies into careers. Do things for love, but also make money on it without letting that in itself ruin the thing you love. There are weird balances in life that, if you can find them and if you can strike them, you will be living more in tune, in alignment with your essential vibration that was given to you at birth by the spinning of the 22 chromosomes landing, dominant one way, dominant the other. So you're this unique combination of traits from each of your parents and bundles, 22 paired bundles. And that creates a vibe. That creates a hardware vibe, a one-cell hardware vibe that starts to change immediately on your first cell division, because that copying technique is not perfect. That cloning is not perfect. And again, we see these recurring themes of replication drift from copy to copy, because it can't be the same down to the light particle level. So different light particles, which are the closest thing we have to pixels, to binary on-off bits, single photons that jump between these quantized states. The very lowest energy level of these quanta, the very smallest waveform, is 1 Planck unit in size, and it lasts for I'm thinking virtual particles. Photons last. If it's a virtual particle of the quantum foam, they're popping in and out of existence at a rate of the lifespan is 1 Planck unit of time. That size is also the theoretical smallest for a black hole. That Planck unit has a lot of interesting characteristics to it. And it's going to have those quantum states that I was talking about, and the spins and the different spin speeds, half spin, double spin. So these are recurring themes in different particles, these quantum states. And so something like binary exists down there somewhere. However, the universe has too much variation for it to be some sort of Lego predetermined click together. So, the quantum foam, accounts for maybe a little bit of what appears to be random, because it's a static, percolating like carbonation all through even the vacuum of space, static of what look like photons with a little bit more mass than an actual photon has, popping in and out of existence everywhere. It may be that you cannot ever know initial state because quantum foam. However, superdeterminists would have you think otherwise. They would have you think that even those particles appearing and disappearing in the quantum foam is part of the original formula, the mathematical concept that set the universe into motion. So everything can be, calculated. But the only computer capable of doing it is another copy of the universe exactly like the original, so what's the point? However, it does bring up the possibility that it's all the Truman Show, that each one is like a gemstone geode that's there to be enjoyed by the spirits on the other side, maybe popping in through anyone's body. There's a lot of possible scenarios. One of them is expressed in the Kurt Vonnegut book, Slaughterhouse-Five. It was one of the things that drew me to Kurt Vonnegut and these concepts as beautiful possibilities. So anyway, the superstring people are kind of close to religion. The quantum loop quantum gravity people talk a lot about that one Planck unit energy quanta, and try and tie it to gravity. Now, what does tie to gravity is macro effects. The macro effects, you get enough atoms together into a planet, that planet warps space-time in a recognizably gravitational way. It is not always and is not necessarily that way, but it is tied to electromagnetism because that planet exists because of the electromagnetism. And so gravity waves can be generated. Gravity waves create one propulsion drive system that the Bobiverse starts out with, and then later on moves on to other ones that are tied more to magnetic forces. So you can be falling into a gravity well you're creating in front of you with the surge drives, or you can just be zipping off in that direction as a result of quantum locked, being magnetically quantum locked into the polarized vacuum of space, using the energy you're taking with you in the form of a fusion reactor to change the properties of that magnetic field so it's pulling you forward like you're on rails. It's got friction. We know that kind of friction exists because we see it in all these quantum locking demonstrations. So in the Bobiverse, I won't spoil too much, I probably have, they figured out how to go from one to the other. The one that relies on the electromagnetic force, ironically enough, makes for a better anti-gravity system than that relies on the gravity wave forces. It's better to be zipped along a rail than it is to be falling into something in front of you all the time. You would have to generate your own power to create that gravity well, as well. So anyway, this is where I think I'll wrap it up, because in my mind as a sci-fi fan, these things are in the oh of course category. Oh, of course we should have that. Why don't we have that already? Oh, the fusion generators are holding us up. Well, there seem to be some interesting announcements about China maybe recently. Well, why aren't we in a not a cold fusion? It's not cold fusion. It's not room temperature superconductivity. It's just get it down reasonably enough. Everything becomes magically possible because you use the energy you're creating for a cooling system. So anyway, that's where I'll wrap it up. We should totally have flying cars by now. It's the computing power. It's being able to navigate perfectly, dealing with the moral questions, having AI smart enough and unuprisingly enough to navigate all our cars, all our flying cars, and stabilize them through these highways in the sky. We should have it by now. I'm passing baby deer on either side. Why don't we have it by now? Maybe someone has it by now, and did I make the video about that all of a sudden? Well, sci-fi fans don't merely want to believe. They're pissed off because we're not there yet. Go, Virgin Galactic, the world has changed forever. That's bigger news than any of these sports things that are going on. Sorry, guys. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe.